What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Visions of Mana, an upcoming JRPG set to release later in August, but it just so happens that they recently dropped a public demo for everyone to take a look at and get a feel for what this game is, because if you're unaware, Visions of Mana is actually the 5th mainline entry to a series that has not seen a normal installment since I believe it was 2006. Now, the good news there is, somewhat like, say, Final Fantasy, for instance, all of the entries are relatively standalone, so you don't need to have played the others to understand what's going on here, though there are a few general through lines and plot devices, such as the Sacred Mana Tree and the Legendary Sword. Now, if you know nothing about this game, it is, in addition to being a JRPG, also an action-adventure that's going to see us moving throughout a semi-open world, gathering up resources, completing side quests for various individuals, gearing up our main party, while we also track down the main story. Now, to start off with a few of my own gripes, just because the demo puts them kind of forefront in your face, is that the demo begins in mid-conversation, basically, with several characters who obviously you don't know, as this demo takes place in the middle of the first chapter of the game. So in addition to just kind of bombarding you with story that doesn't make a ton of sense in context, they then follow this up by giving you a bunch of screen versions of tutorials back to back to explain the basics of the elemental vessel system. So as demos go, I think they could have presented this information a little more clearly, but then my other gripe for this one is the keyboard and mouse controls. This is, of course, a PC channel, so that's where we're playing this, and more or less as expected, to be honest with you, this is yet another JRPG with pretty terrible PC controls. And as I always say, if you're going to bring a title to any individual platform, it should realistically run well with the default control scheme for that platform. At the very least, you gotta let people rebind these keys. But those gripes aside, let's get into the rest of it. So, starting with the general plot setup, essentially we are escorting a young woman to the Sacred Mana Tree on a pilgrimage of sorts, where things of course ramp up from there. But the first thing I want to talk about is the elemental vessel system. So this serves both as an important combat mechanic, but also for traversal. So you're going to find elemental vessels as you move through the world, and you'll attach these to characters, which is what ultimately determines their class and the type of elemental magic they can wield. It also changes their appearance in-game, which I thought was kind of neat, but it's my understanding that some of this will also be affected by just general cosmetics as well from the looks of things. As you adventure with these elemental vessels, you'll also come across things that allow you to develop them as a class, giving you more and more powers when that particular one is equipped on a certain character. But what's more is how this plays into traversal. These elemental vessels will be able to interact with the world in various ways. For instance, in this cold area, I had to bypass a freezing river, and you have to slow down time in order to jump across various little floating icebergs. And there are even more examples of this later on, where for instance, you can use these to do things like create bridges. So a big portion of that I also want to share about is that there's a surprising amount of movement involved in this game, jumping up and around things, collecting resources as you go. For instance, these big blobs of honey everywhere could be traded in at a bear for permanent stat bonuses, albeit in limited quantities. Now, in the more open field area, we can also start running into and performing side quests and exploring the world to find little side objectives. And doing all that can of course lead you to various resources that you can then spend on upgrading your characters via vendors and the like who can sell you upgraded versions of gear, grab items, etc. The usual stuff, I would say. But then let's talk about combat itself. So this is an action RPG, as I mentioned, and what each character can do is going to be down to the weapons they have equipped, as well as the elemental vessel they're using, determining some of their abilities. And you're also going to be able to switch characters to utilize the other members of your party in effect. And in order to manage all three of them, you have the ability to set up a sort of strategy for your party, including some basics in terms of what you want them to be doing in terms of using abilities and resources effectively. And while it's not as in-depth as something as, say, Final Fantasy XII's Gambit system, it's decent enough for what's on offer here. Though I still have a couple of notes. For starters, with this being a demo, it's hard to say what this will look like in the final versions, but I would say this game is likely going to need some form of a difficulty slider in order to make combat truly interesting. And this is because everything outside of the boss at the end of the demo were extremely easy to fight and offered very, very little resistance. And with this being early in the game, that might be by design. These enemies might ramp up in difficulty and things later, which is something I can't know from playing just this demo. demo, but they offer so little resistance that I could see interacting with this combat system getting kind of boring pretty quickly. But luckily, the boss specifically was much more interesting. For starters, it had more interesting attack patterns that had to be avoided by actually traversing the playable environment, like such as jumping over its tentacles or simply getting out of the way, obviously. But what's more, areas of the giant kraken we're fighting here were weak points, and hitting them would give you critical damage, and then as you built up a counter, you could eventually unleash your special attack for that character. And it was decently fun, even if the Kraken really wasn't doing enough damage to feel dangerous. But all in all, I would say if they can manage to clean up a few things that I've seen in this demo, I think this could be a pretty fun JRPG, and obviously with its more cutesy art style, and its, at least from what I've seen, relatively simple mechanics, could make it a good RPG to play with kids, for instance. So speaking for myself, I don't know that I'm going to review this one specifically. We'll see how it goes. If I have time, as this is launching right next to another game I am definitely reviewing on August 29th to be specific. But what I do plan on doing is seeing if I can get my son interested in playing something that has a little more RPG depth than he's used to, as I think he might enjoy this one. But regardless of whether or not I actually review it, I think it'll be interesting to see how this series is received given how long it's been since its previous entry. But that is pretty much going to do it for today's video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.